Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Bell. I am so excited that everybody's here. I'm the president of the Rotary Club for Global Action 2023-2024, so just about to hit the 6-month mark. For those of you who might be new to the idea of the Rotary Club for Global Action, I doubt it, but just in case, Brian Rusch had the incredible idea, chartered about 3 years ago now, Brian. And we are a global club. We're a global e-club. We have members from at least 28 countries, and we meet 3 times a month in different time zones to make sure that we can have as many people join as we can. And we've just had a great time, getting to know each other, really doing that, making a big world and a small world all at the same time. I'm excited for this meeting because as a single mom, it's definitely been really important for me to be able to have my Rotary family and doing what we can in the club to do what we can in the world and to support each other. So without further ado, I'll let Brian Rusch introduce himself. Brian.
All right. Well, thanks, Chris. And I think most of you know me. For those of you who don't, my name is Brian Rusch. I am the founder of Rotary Club for Global Action. I am also the vice chair of Rotary International's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. And I am so excited to be here today and see so many friends. For those of you that don't know what the speaker series is, it's an event that we do usually every couple months, and then we take a break because I get really busy and tired. And then I get inspired and we bring it back. And so I am super inspired today because I get to have 2 of my really great friends here with me today, Brittany Arthur and Drew Kessler. Now, I first met Brittany when we were both speaking at an online event for Rotaract Canada, I guess it was during the pandemic.
Yes.
And yeah, and let me actually just spotlight you guys really quick because there's Drew Kessler, there's Brittany, and there's me. And it was a really awesome event, and we got to chance to talk. And then this summer, I had the opportunity the 2 of us got to spend some quality time, plus with your family in Europe. And a lot of you probably know Brittany speaks at events all over the world. She's been the past Rotary Foundation Scholar, a past president of the Rotaract Club of Berlin, and she's past vice chair of the Rotary International Joint Committee for Young Leaders and Alumni Engagement. In 2018, she served as the MC for the Rotary International Convention in Toronto. Professionally, and I think I'm getting this all right, Brittany? Brittany specializes in innovation, design thinking, and design spirits in Japan and in Japanese. She founded the Business Karaoke Podcast. It's the only English-Japanese innovation podcast in the world. Brittany also founded the is it Tokyo or Toyoko? Toyoko Design Thinking Network, the only English-Japanese innovation meetup. She is a member of both the Australian and New Zealand Chamber of Commerce in Japan. She's joining us. I wrote this and then I realized she's not. I thought she was joining us from home in Tokyo. She's actually joining us from her birthday celebration. Today is her birthday. Happy birthday, Brittany. In Seoul, South Korea. And but she lives in Tokyo with her husband and her young son, Charles. Drew Kessler is another great friend of mine who actually, even though we didn't meet in Canada, we really connected in Canada. So Canada has a very important place in our hearts for the 3 of us. But he is the Rotary International Director for Zones 28 and 32, and he currently serves as the treasurer for Rotary International. We're debating this, but I'm going to say he is the youngest person to ever serve as a Rotary International Director. There may have been someone younger back in when Rotary was founded, but we're not really positive, so we're going to say he's the youngest. He joined Rotary in 2001 at the age of 20, and he went on to serve as president of the Rotary Club of North Rockland at age 25. At that time, he was the youngest president in the club's 80-year history. At age 32, he served as district governor for Rotary District 7210. As a husband and a father to 5 children, Drew prioritizes finding a way to incorporate family into Rotary events, projects, and meetings whenever he can. All of his children have been touched by Rotary, whether it was through Early Act, Interact, RILA, or Rotary Youth Exchange. He and his family reside in Hopewell Junction, New York. And my first quality time was in Canada. And I've had the opportunity to hang out with him, his amazing wife, Vicky, And I've only met two of their kids, but we have been able to hang out in cities all over the world. So I'm really thrilled to have him here. So welcome to you both. I know that you're both fierce advocates for inclusion of families in Rotary. And, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think that it's really important that we start to include parents and families into this discussion. So what I really want to hear from both of you, and Drew, we're going to start with you, is what is your reason that we need to make Rotary more family friendly?
Brian, first, before I go and start diving off that, really appreciate, number one, the invitation, but more importantly, you spotlighting this topic. This is a topic that's very much near and dear to my heart, and I'll share in a second why. But I think more and more we just need to focus on not just this, but making sure that our members have space and are viable for their life, right? And just the concept of so much going on that we need to provide for that. So as it relates, why is this so important to me is it's more from a perspective of not having our current members as well as our potential members have to choose. Right now, far too often, we have our members choose between Rotary and their family. And I've been in this great organization for 22 years, and I have faced it on a regular basis where I have to choose between having dinner at home with my great partner and wife and kids, or going to a Rotary event. So I think it's being mindful that if we're looking truly for all demographics, and I don't believe it's a one size fits all, that you need to have all people that are young professionals or people with kids, but we need a little bit of everything. And to me, that's what makes this organization so amazing. And if we're going to truly try to do this, we need to make sure we find space for those who are in situations like mine and Brittany's and people who want to be part of this great movement, but have things going on at home that candidly are more important than Rotary, because to me, family will always be number one.
Well, I think that's really important, is because we do, we talk about what obstacles people have to participating in Rotary and what it is, and really the biggest thing is our lives. It's family and friends and work. And so, Brittany, same question for you. Really, is like, why do you feel this is really an important topic that we need to be having this conversation around? And I know that you're a relatively young, new parent, so you have a different perspective. Drew's been a parent for a really long time.
Drew's already got the hang of it. Drew already knows what he's doing. Thank you so much. And everything, obviously, +1 to everything that Drew just mentioned. But I think, Brian, you highlighted really the key, which is when it comes to Rotary and our membership, the competition is not whether or not we join a Lions Club, as you mentioned before. It's really about whether or not we engage in something in work, or whether we go and do extracurricular activities, whatever that might be. So what we really want to look at, and for me, why I want to speak about this specifically, is because I think that we've moved beyond a point where people think if it's okay for people to be diverse in Rotary. People have diverse faces, they have diverse backgrounds, and I've noticed that Rotary is much more open to that. So I think we're ready for the next level of conversation, which is, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? And this is really where I want to lean in and speak more to this conversation, because, again, as you mentioned, in our work, we do a lot of user-centric design, and there's no area more important that I want to be designing for our users than it comes to our members here at Rotary. We're all on the board of, hey, let's jump on, Rotary strength is its differences, but let's talk about on a granular level every day. What can we do? What are some action steps that we can implement that can really help us leverage those differences? So that's why I'm here today. And of course, to spend time with you.
Well, I always love spending time with both of you. And before I go on really quick, I do want to say that we're going to have time for questions from everybody. So if you would like to ask a question of Drew or Brittany, or both of them, please put it in the chat, and I will make sure to try and flag it. And we'll try to get to everybody's questions by the end of this time. So Brittany, you bring up a good question. How do we do this? I mean, that's sort of the obvious question. Yep. How do we start doing that? Yep. So what are your thoughts on that?
So when it comes to innovation and human-centric design, the first thing that you need to do is speak and understand your users. And I think this is the exact same thing here when it comes to Rotary. We have to sit down with people and understand where they're at, what's going on in their lives. And I think that's really key. So the idea of sitting down and building empathy with someone and their new life situation. You know, it might be me, for example, that I'm a newer parent. And so, for example, I was able to do, you know, all the Rotary things, all the Rotary time, because it was just me, you know, it was just me. I wasn't married and I didn't have a son. So if I had to fly to a district conference, you know, on a Friday and then attend my meeting on a Tuesday and all these other things, that, you know, it was fine. But now that I'm a parent and now that I have a family, and it was interesting because that happened for me over the pandemic. So I kind of had this very long break from physical Rotary as well. And so I think the absolute first step when it comes to designing some real action steps is to not assume that anyone's got the answer. Know that, you know, if you're a club president or if you're on your board, sit down and have a chat with some of your members and just kind of get a feel of where they're at. How are you going? Can we expect you at meetings over the next kind of 6 months? Or, you know, do you kind of want to participate from afar? So that'd be my first thing before we jump into a lot.
So Drew, same thing, because I've been to several of your events. I've been to dinners with you. I've been to your institute, and you create an atmosphere that's really welcoming to families. And so tell us about how you do that. But also, while I think it's, you know, the three of us have the benefit that we attend a lot of the international, global, or all over events, but how do we do this on a club level? How are we getting to it so that our clubs can actually incorporate this? Because I think that that's really where people are challenged with it and where we need to start, right?
Yeah, and I actually think from the club, you know, level and club opportunity, I think you have more of a blank slate, and it's easier, if you will, because you're not dealing with such a broad and wide group. So before I say anything further, I think it's appropriate, and it's something I've always kept top of mind, that while I am very much the biggest probably advocate you'll ever find to make sure a family is engaged and involved in Rotary, not every Rotary event should be or is family friendly. So I totally acknowledge and agree that there are times and spaces that it just does not make sense to have children, regardless of age, be part of it. So that's something that is at the core, and we always have to be mindful of. Now, having said that, I think that the big thing that we need to do is just make this concept top of mind, right? We are all part of clubs. We all do, well, I'm hoping we all have service opportunities. To me, that's the easiest place to start, is making our service opportunities not only family friendly, partner friendly, friend family. I mean, that's the easiest way, excuse me, friend friendly, easiest type of way to bring people in and get them engaged, right? So whether it's our service opportunities, it's our socials, right? If you're having a social at a bar and we're going to be focusing around, you know, adult beverages, well then yeah, kids don't make sense. But if we're having it at a venue, or a venue where you get to choose, maybe you pick a place that's a little more family friendly, so our members can participate in it. And when we do things like this, we also have to be very mindful of the economics that go with it, right? It's easy to say, okay, now kids are allowed, but if, let's just say, a ticket price is $100 US, right? Now we're asking for the partner to come, so now it's $200 US. And if we're not mindful, and we start talking about somebody who might have some children or grandchildren that potentially could be involved, now you're starting to multiply this thing, where an event that might have cost a Rotarian 100, which is maybe even too much to start with, now could be 400 or 500, where even the best intentions, we fall short because it's just not feasible, right? So these are just all things that I think it's all about starting the conversation. And as we're developing events, and at the end of the day, every one of us in Rotary are leaders, and we're leaders at different phases or different places within the organization. But whether you're a club president, you're a committee chair, you're on a committee, you have a voice to bring this to, you know, conversation to when you're at the infancy stages of starting to talk about a great event you're going to potentially have or be part of.
So you bring up something, you know, because I think that I think, you know, my previous club, the Rotary Club of Peninsula Starlight, which I see that we have a lot of members from visiting us today, but they've always been really kid friendly, right? Like, we've always welcomed children in that. And so I'm curious for you, Drew, specifically, because I think Charles is probably too young still. although Brittany probably has thoughts, but what specifically do your kids get out of being part of this, being able to welcome to this, to Rotary, and when you're involving them in different events and projects?
Yeah, so first let me just put some perspective around that. I've been in Rotary for 22 years. I joined 6 weeks before my oldest, who's now 21, was born. So my kids don't know any other life than a Rotary life. And I think what it's done for them is provided them a confidence that I don't think you could replicate in any other kind of situation. Their comfort with adults, their comfort with conversations, right? Their comfort of being at events, whether they're the black tie kind or the barbecue that we go to, they understand what it is to interact and to be social. So I think for nothing other than that, I think what it exposes them outside of a traditional child might have family adults in their life, but the true understanding of having, a social network, if you will, of adults that also get to see them grow through their life, that are with them, from the beginning, as they go through adolescence. So I think that's a key thing. The other piece for me, which has been paramount, is to see service, right? It's very easy to point or to throw money at a situation, but when kids are involved in Rotary, they're able to get their hands dirty, right? Like they can go feed the homeless, they can go ring the bell for Salvation Army, which is a big thing we do here in North America. They have opportunities that otherwise maybe they do, maybe they don't, but Rotary provides that for them. So those are key things that I believe they'll have their entire lives. And then you start getting into all of our youth programs, which to me are second to none. Our youth exchange program is touted around the globe for how amazing it is, and this is direct entree into it when you grow up or you're part of it as a youth. And there's Interact and Rile and all these things that nobody ever hears about our youth programs and doesn't hear people just be absolutely passionate. Also, those who've been through it are extremely passionate because they're that amazing a program. So it's one of those things, is just as much a Rotarian might get out of it, I think kids of Rotarians or grandkids of Rotarians might even get more out of it than our members.
So I agree. I mean, as a lot of people know, I was a Rotary Youth Exchange student, and I credit that as one of the top 3 things in my life that was transformative. And so, Brittany, you're also a Rotary alum. What is your hope? Because I've met Charles at Rotary events. What is your hope that he gets out of this organization? What is that? And not only that, but what is your hope that other Rotarians and other Rotary members get from interacting with your family? Because it's not just what the benefit is to your family.
Yes.
I see a benefit to Rotary members as a whole.
Yes. And just before we move on from the Rotary Youth Exchange conversation, I always love to tell my Rotary Youth Exchange story, which is that I sat next to the exchange student. So I wasn't the exchange student myself. I was the one sitting next to the exchange student. And that's how I found out about Rotary. So when we speak about Rotary Youth Exchange, we often speak about the exchange students themselves, but we don't talk about the students that were sitting to the left and to the right of that student in the classroom. And I was one of those students that was sitting to the left and the right. So Rotary Youth Exchange for me is also very special. In terms of what I hope and why I'm involved and why I bring my husband and why I bring my son to Rotary is because we're an international family. I'm Australian, my husband's Mexican. We run a business in Japan, and there's no place where you can feel more at home no matter where you are in the world than when you're involved with Rotary. You can be in Nigeria, you can be in Germany, you can be in New Zealand, you can be anywhere, and you can walk in and there's going to be some familiarities or some similarities about just how people are, about how the meeting runs, that's just really nice to be a part of. So one of the reasons for me why it's so important to be a part of Rotary is because of the international aspect, that I really feel that it's an international family that represents my international family. So that's probably the first thing. The second thing is maybe coming back to the idea of we need to do things purposefully. We need to do things with a very strong goal in mind. So as Drew mentioned, not every single event in Rotary is family friendly, the same way that not every workshop that I run or not every meeting that I run that I bring my son. Sometimes I might have, a client meeting, or I might have a coffee with a client, or I might have a team meeting or something, and he can come along. But there are certainly moments where, you know, he's either with my husband or he's with my mom, who helps me out sometimes, you know, and he's not, and it's not really the moment, because we've got to think about that experience. We've got to think about what's the point of that meeting. If that point of the meeting is to work and to get a whole lot of things done, then we need to be in a mindset, we need to be in an environment where we can get a whole lot of things done. If the purpose of the meeting is to connect and catch up, well, then, you know, a whole lot of people, then any kind of person is welcome, right? So what I hope, and I think, Brian, you brought up a good point, which is not only what value is it for my family, but also what do other people get from it? Because in Rotary, you know, it's a family, and we've got to think in that two-way street. And I hope that if people see, for example, that I bring my son along, I hope that they, and also when it comes to my business, I also run a business as well as being involved in Rotary. I hope that just one other person can say, you know what, maybe I don't have to step back. Maybe I don't have to step back from my business. Maybe I don't have to step back from Rotary. Maybe I can do both by somehow, you know, braiding it all together. So for me, the fact that other people don't pull away is maybe one other thing, but I also hope that people just really, you know, have a good time. Charles is quite funny. So I hope.
You're not biased, but no, I think that that's really important though, because, you know, when I speak a lot about DEI, one of the things I always say is that the way that we change the culture of an organization is through visibility. And I think that both of you really do that well by incorporating your families into what you're doing, so that people are seeing, you know, Drew, I've been at fancy dinners with your kids, and they're just so well behaved and like polite, but also fun. Like they're not just like robots. They're still super fun. So I think that it is for me. I mean, I don't have kids, and so it's like, why do I care about this? Well, it's because I see that this is something that really is something that we need to look at and start focusing, creating change around. And so, speaking of creating change, and we don't have to get into details, but I'm curious, because I like to talk about, I like to dish. So what I want to know is, are either of you willing to share about instances where maybe you didn't feel like your whole family was welcome at a Rotary event? And how do you deal with that? What do you do? What's the reaction in the moment? What's the reaction after the fact? I'm curious to know that. And so either one of you can start that, but
So Brittany, I'm happy to, or if you
Go for it.
So I will tell you, there's, and before I consider bringing, you know, one of the kids to an event, I check to make sure that it makes sense, right? So like I try to check that box. But as an organization, and I'm doing a total just brush of the stroke here, and this starts from the top. And I don't mean top and bottom like that, but from a Rotary International perspective, we have not figured this out. There is a huge hole right now as it relates to children even attending our convention, right? Or events at the convention. It's cumbersome. So, I mean, when we get down to it, we're at an event, I will tell you more often than not, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, Rotarians are extremely gracious. They're excited to see the kids. They're excited to see Vicky and I. It's a very warm feeling. It's the getting there part that isn't always so warm, right? It's the awkwardness of filling out extra paperwork that ordinarily you might not. That's not even electronic or online. Like I have to physically, manually, like for instance, to register my children for an international convention, I have to fill out a form by hand, like number 2 pencil, kind of fill it out, because we don't have the infrastructure, right? And then you take it to the next step further. You know, it's at a specific event. Are they welcome? Are they not welcome? Do you need special clearance, right? Like, do you need approval by somebody somewhere that says this is okay? So, I mean, it's just, there's all these little things. And as I noted before, the economics are against me. The economics are against anybody who's trying to bring other people, other children to an event, because you just start multiplying this. I talk about the lunches at convention, which, you know, are amazing, right? It's 1,500 Rotarians in a room listening to the president-elect. Well, the cost of the food, right, is the same for me as it is for the kids. That becomes a really expensive lunch, you know, and it's just not everybody can manage that. So for me, it's logistics more than anything when it comes to these kind of things. And, you know, will the kids get something out of it, because, you know, I have to be very mindful of how much of this do I expose them to. And if it's going to be your traditional, we use this phrase, and it's an unfortunate one, but if it's going to be a traditional rubber chicken dinner, and it's not going to be this valuable thing that necessarily maybe I won't get something out of, let alone the kids, I don't want to expose them to it, because I want all of their experiences to be good ones, that they're looking to go to their next Rotary event, right? Not, it's like, I can't believe I did. My kids wind up sitting through those things. But as a whole, I try not to do that. So like I said, more often than not, everybody is very welcoming and accommodating, but we're just not top of mind. It's thought of after the fact, not before.
And I think that's important, because there is a lot of logistical sort of like, there's so much, we'll call it bureaucracy around Rotary and how to deal with stuff. And we noticed that with, you know, just several years ago with the gender issue, you had, it was on a binary and we couldn't do it. And it was something that took, just changing that one thing within the Rotary world took a lot of work. So in order to like incorporate families into this, I can imagine how many different staff members and council, blah, 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 that we have to talk to be able to create that change. But we have to. So Brittany, for you, what kind of challenges?
Yes. Thank you so much, Brian. And I would also just second what Drew mentioned in terms of the logistics, because you also have to sit down and you have to speak to your family and say, okay, let's look at the, you know, our vacation days, or let's look at our budget, our family budget. And you have to make a very good reason for why a significant portion of your family travel budget should be going to this event, right? So you have to get buy-in from your spouse or your significant other, as well as your children. I have found that when there's a poor experience for children, for example, is because we have the entire probably event hasn't been planned with, for example, people in mind very well. It's kind of like, oh, people are planning a certain conference and they're just going through the checklist of things that you should have at a conference, rather than sitting down and saying, what can we do so that the people that are coming feel really welcome, right? It could be something, you know, as Drew mentioned, even getting there, you know, we'll travel for international events, and showing up somewhere where you've never been before, to maybe a country you don't speak the language. How wonderful is it when you see the face of your aide that you've had a conversation with, and you just think, oh, how wonderful that this person can take me to the hotel. It is just so wonderful. And I just find that there are moments when, if I'm at an event, which has happened almost none, that when there is a moment where I don't necessarily feel that it's very well fit to my family, and I think Drew, you also hit a really good point, hit on a really good point, which is, as a parent, we have to do everything that we can to make sure that, you know, we're being responsible. So if I'm speaking, for example, I'll make sure that my husband and Charles are front left, right? So the minute there's maybe a little bit of a moment, that Charles and my husband can exit very quickly without affecting the experience of everybody else, because that's really important. People are there, they've made time out of their lives, they're scheduled, they've invested in getting there. The last thing you want is that they don't really have a great experience. You want them to have a great experience. So I think it all comes down to, the reason we have poor experiences is because we haven't sat down and taken a really personal look and said, who's coming? Right? Whether, for example, you know, I also have a friend from Rotary who's gay. He has a husband. They're very happily married. And he was at an event where I think someone kept referring to him as his friend. He said, this is my husband. This is not my friend. This is my husband, you know? And so things like that, the reason why I bring that up, and in the context of families, is because it's the same thing. Just because somebody's life doesn't look like yours doesn't mean that it's not really valuable and really important. So I think coming down to the level of who is coming to this event and what do they need, and let's have a conversation beforehand. I think that's also one thing that maybe we forget a little bit in Rotary, because we're all a little bit under the pump when it comes to organization. We forget how much actual planning time we have. These events are often planned years in advance, sometimes, you know, years in advance, but then somehow all of the work is done in the, you know, in the front kind of 6 weeks. There's so much we can do beforehand, is sitting down with people. What do you need to make this event really, you know, friendly to you? And again, what can we do on our side, for example, to make the event really friendly? So for example, if, say, for example, I'm speaking, I'm with my husband and my son, say my husband is there, maybe, someone else has a child, maybe they can play with Charles, for that kind of moment. There's no, when we have a conversation and we open up and we have that blank slate, and as Drew mentioned, we can talk sometimes it's easier on a club level because there isn't as much kind of structure already in place. We can sit down and say, what does this person need? And design around that. If we think about the really poor experiences in our lives, taxes, renewing your driver's license, all those kind of horrible things, it's not because somebody sat down and said, how can we make this experience the absolute worst experience people can have in their day? It's because nobody's thought about it. So I think one of the reasons why we have poor experiences or poor moments in an experience in Rotary is because no one's thought about it. No one's thought about what does it look like if a child comes, right? No one's thought about that Drew has to fill out, mountains of paperwork. Nobody's thought about what it looks like if somebody brings a same-sex partner. Nobody's thought about these things. And so if we haven't thought about it, we can't design for it. If we don't design for it, we can't solve it. So I think coming back to what you're doing, Brian, which is bringing light to this conversation, helps us talk about it. When we talk about it, that's when we can start really designing for it to solve it. And so when I have had a poor experience, it actually really encouraged me to speak more about it, because it showed me that there are poor experiences in Rotary and people do walk away. The three of us are people who don't walk away when, things are hard, but there are some people that go, you know what, this is too hard, forget it, Rotary. Unfortunately, we've all been in this too long. We can't leave anymore. Even if we wanted to, we couldn't. We've just been here too long, right? And so that's for me really the push of anything, which is I did have a moment where I thought, hang on a second, we really need to rethink how we do family in Rotary, and I'd love to be part of the conversation.
So you brought up a couple different things, and first I want to give a shout out to Drew, because one of the best aides I've ever had is at his institute. And hey, Cindy, I don't know if she's on, but make sure you tell her if she's not, or make her...
I saw her name pop up before.
Okay,
So
good. Well, she must be here. And I think, Brittany, you bring up a really interesting thing about, we're talking about creating a family-friendly vibe, but what we're not talking about is family. What does that mean? And Ratnavel, who mentioned, what are we doing to allow for elderly parents that a lot have to be caregivers for, and especially with as we get younger people involved in the organization, more of us are going to have elderly parents that we need to do, and we have to, that are able to be part of what we're doing, but maybe don't want to be Rotarians. How do we incorporate that into this structure? What does that look like to each of you? Drew, go ahead, because you
Yes. So and as Brittany as Brittany noted, to me, and this is something we face in North America very significantly, it's the member experience. Or in North America, I will tell you, it's the lack of member experience that we are losing a fair amount, and we're just not attractive, right? So I think everything we do has to have that lens, regardless of where you are in the world, on what does this provide for from a member experience perspective, right? And to your point, regardless of the demographic, everybody's affected in some way by this movement, right? It could be grandparents who care for their kids. It could be, people who, as you noted, who are elderly, who have caregivers or have different things. They might still be Rotarians, right? But they're managing through this. It could be, younger or middle-aged folks who are taking care of elderly, and it might not be parents. It could be whatever it is. It's all about, as we're thinking about these things, and even just down to the core of the club meeting, how we physically meet, where we meet, right? How easy it is to get to, what spaces we're providing physically, not even just the feeling of space, but the physical aspect of what we're doing. I mean, this is all part of the conversation that we have to get down, and Brittany noted it before, we have to ask our members. There has to be a conversation. What do we need to do? Because far too often we just know, we meet at such and such a time and such a location, and this is the way we're going to do it, whether it fits your box or it doesn't fit your box. And for some, that might be great, and that's an awesome experience. But if we're truly trying to represent all demographics and be relevant to all demographics, we're going to have to get creative. And there can be very much situations where you have a Rotary club that is the club that meets for lunch and will continue meeting for lunch, but they provide space, whether it be a satellite club or a new club that meets at a different time, a different location. meets virtually, whatever, but that we all are part of this one big family that allows for this, right? So, to me, I don't think anybody has ill intentions when they go about setting these things up. I don't think it comes from any malice place. It's just, it's not top of mind. It's just, best example I think I can illustrate just with, it's not even in the perspective of people who are parents, but maybe their kids are significantly older right now, right? So and right now, most of the travel for my world is my wife and our two younger boys. Our older children are now out of the house and they live their own lives and they don't travel with us as much. We get met at an airport, as Brittany mentioned, the aide comes, which is the nicest thing that could ever happen, right? And they pick us up and everyone's all excited. Those trips, we start at 7 a.m. in the morning, right? And they have us running until 10 p.m. at night. And we get to see the coolest things and meet the greatest people. It's all great. But then the question comes, we get back to the hotel at 10 o'clock at night and you know what they ask? You guys ready for dinner? So I'm traveling with an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old. It's 10 o'clock at night. Like, it's just, but they want to give, they want to feed us, they want to do for us. But it's just, they lose sight of when they had kids that were 11 and 8. You don't do dinner at 10 o'clock at night. It's just not in the realm of a normal schedule. So it's just, I always look at it where I don't believe anyone comes at it from a bad heart. It's just not in the day-to-day. And that's where I think we just, to the whole point of this conversation, we need to have these conversations. So it's more front and center. And
so, Brittany, what are your feelings about how we can incorporate different types of families and kind of expand that definition of what we mean? And I know that my friend David, who's visiting us as well, he's a DEI chair up in 7330, but he was asking about like caregivers or accessibility. I think a lot of this comes to accessibility, which is a parallel conversation to the conversation we're having today, because it really is, how do we do that?
Yeah, I think that's key. And I've often heard from Rotarians that, well, I don't know, or what, how am I supposed to, I don't have the answers. That's wonderful. Nobody has the answers. Not even, those of us with, families that look different, whether you have children or whether you don't have children, whatever your family looks like, we don't have the answers, which is why we're in a wonderful organization where, as long as we are able to open the dialogue and have empathy for each other, which is so much connected to our four-way test, that we can work through it, right? And so what I would say is that we are on the same way that we are able to even do something that what we're doing now, which is like to meet on Zoom. Do you remember before the pandemic, a Rotary Club meeting on Zoom was like, oh yeah, maybe, but like, let's take it slow. And in 10 years from now, like we can kind of like talk about it. And then from one day to the next, all of a sudden, people who never thought that they could be an online president or an online member, all of a sudden we're more than able to join Zoom meetings. We're able to even do remote service projects. I mean, we've done some incredible things. I mean, the reason why I kind of bring that up is because it's a situation that in Rotary, we kind of didn't think it was really kind of like our business to jump into the online world, at least not too hastily. And then all of a sudden, a global pandemic happened, then boom, everyone was online. And I want to bring that back to family in the sense of we might not think that this is something that affects us, but it does. Whether it's our member or our members, elderly parents or younger parents, whatever it might be. But this is what I would do in terms of what can we actually concretely take away is I would sit down with my club and I would do two things. One is I would speak to all the people in my club. Right. I would sit down and say, I would make a list. Who are the people in my club? And I would sit down and maybe not even with the people who have children, maybe that there are, others who don't have children, but they, in terms of families, maybe they've, something that I've also seen, for example, especially amongst my kind of age group is people, marrying for the second time and then getting bonus children. Maybe they weren't necessarily the ones that had the children, but all of a sudden, they now have to consider children, even though they themselves might not have been the ones to have had the children, but their partner does, and then now they're a new family. Another thing that I would do, apart from speaking to my current members, is I would speak to people that maybe aren't members and say, what does your life look like? Would you be interested? Maybe, people that have shown interest in Rotary but never joined, maybe speak to them and say, what does your life look like? Tell me a little bit more. And then I'd have these two perspectives, my current members, as well as, because if we only speak to our members, then we only design for the people that are in our current organization. But if we speak to people a little bit outside of our organization as well, and then speak to them, and what I would do is I'd make a parallel and say, what are both of these groups looking for, right? And then together with my club, I wouldn't take this on as an individual task. This is not something you have to do. I would say, sit down with the task, and then at your board meeting, instead of going through the typical agenda, maybe run a fun, like, envisioning session and say, what could our next meeting look like if we were to invite these people, right? And what's really helpful, particularly in human-centered design, is having a specific person in mind, right? Having a specific person in mind. So try to have a specific family, whether it's and try to go with names, ages, because what an 8-year-old child needs, Drew mentioned his, two younger boys, 8 and 11. My son is 16 months old, so we're at a kind of we're in another phase altogether, so what I would do is try to have someone really specific in mind in your club, right? Try that you can envision that their name, envision their face, and ask them a few questions about what they might need, and try to design with them an experience that that people would really like to join. So you don't have to do this on your own. You don't need to know all the answers. Just engage people who want to be part of the process. And there's nothing more satisfying. And one of the reasons, if you think back to the people that you kind of became friends with in Rotary, it's probably someone you worked with. You were either on a committee together, you were either on a board together, or you either did a service project together. Because working together, creating something together, creates a bond that nothing else can. So if you are doing this together with your club, building, creating, designing, solutioning this together, your club connections are going to be even stronger, and it's just your whole club will be better for it.
Well, and I think that you bring up something that's interesting, because on the Rotary, the DEI task force, now the DEI advisory council, one of the things that we've really done is look at our alumni, and specifically the ones that don't become Rotary members, and having conversations with them about why. And I think that that's a really fertile ground for all of us to really be reaching out to talk to our Peace Fellows, talk to, Youth Exchange, people that were part of RILA that are now older, even people on Rotaract. Why are they not getting engaged in the way that they could? And how could we improve that user experience for them as a member to really thrive within the organization? So Drew, I have something you mentioned something the other day, and I want to know more about it. So you mentioned that you have this idea, this dream for a family membership. What is a family membership? What does that look like? How does that work?
Yeah, so this is something I've been noodling forever, and this is it's something that is going to take a big movement to potentially one day have, just because of how the governance of our organization works and how we're set up. But conceptually, and at the end of the day, clubs are autonomous. So clubs can create any type of structure they want as it relates to this. And districts can follow suit. And my hope is it can groundswell, and then hopefully Rotary International pays attention. But to me, a family membership is something that's offered to families that we cater to everything, right? And we sometimes use the expression from cradle to grave, right? We offer something for everybody. So as a Rotarian, I very much look forward to receiving my magazine once a month, right? Whether that's digital or it's physically in your hands. But what if we had a situation where we were providing every month or every 2 months a coloring book for the ages of 3 to 6, and we're providing a comic book from ages 7 to 10 or whatever. But the point is that I no longer have a Rotary ID of my name. So it's Drew Kessler, Rotary member 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What if it was the Kessler household with Rotary number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? That we're all members of it. We struggle so much with transitions in this organization, right? We do everything we can to get the interactors to pay attention. Number one, know that Rotary is even tied to Interact, right? Then they go off to a university or community, and we pray that they get into Rotaract. And then now they're in Rotaract, and hopefully they're having a good experience, and we pray even more that they get into Rotary. Well, what if from the beginning we were all, because it's an ideal, right? It's we all follow this core baseline. And what if we were all Rotarians? And I know that means different things for different people, but it's just that overall concept that we're now saying you as an individual necessarily aren't the member. It's whoever is in your life, however you define that. There's a totally, we have to get into the granular aspect of it, but just from a very high level, what does that mean? Does that mean who you cohabitate with? Does that mean who you spend the most time with? Because that's what I think what we want, right? We want an organization of like-minded people. And whether you're 13 or you're 73, you could be like-minded. And to me, that those are folks who want to do good for their community, want to network with each other. And I think there's a lot there that we can unpack and potentially be more open to different type of statuses and classifications as it relates to level, and you know, a lot would have to happen, but there are clubs out there that can do this. We can figure out a way that we're catering to everybody in a family.
So
to
I'd
make
love
sure
this. I look forward to seeing your proposal to the council on legislation about all this. So Brittany, what is your big, hairy, audacious goal for really? I mean, like if you can dream it, it can happen within Rotary to engage families. What does that look like for you?
Yes, I'd be a big fan of that. When we were preparing for this call, Drew mentioned something that I think is becoming also true for me, which is the reason why you can do it all is because you bring it all together. How can you work? How can you do Rotary? How can you have time for yourself? It's because you kind of bring it all together. And, you know, for example, yeah, I'm currently on a task force where we're looking at our digital engagement, what, you know, digital events might look like, what that, how we envision that for members. And we might, and you know, we have a face-to-face meeting coming up in Evanston in March. And I reached out to our lead, Brad Howard, because we hadn't set the dates yet. And I said, hey, Brad, a client of mine is wanting to set some workshops for March, but I really want to prioritize this task force. Like, I really want to prioritize this task force. So please let me know when it is so that I can tell my client, you know, the B dates, right? So, because I want to give this the A, I want to give this the A priority. And I think my big audacious goal for Rotary is that people don't have to choose, that they bring it all together. I know that maybe Drew and I might be extreme examples because I also, you know, run our business with my husband as well. And then, you know, there are some people that don't want to be in the same Rotary Club as their spouse, which is also fine. You know, but there are some people, you know, that, you know, we like to bring it all together. And I think that's been really big for me. So I would love to see particularly more women, because the last thing you feel, honestly, when you've just had a baby and you've just gone back to work, if someone says, what about your community? What are you doing for your community? You're thinking, I'm trying to keep myself alive, my child alive, and I'm just praying that my significant other can keep themselves alive because they're an adult. And then you're asking me what I'm doing for my community, you know, so there's that. But I do really hope, particularly when it comes to younger women, especially if they're running their own businesses, to not shy away from being involved in Rotary, and that it's actually a wonderful place. And if anything, the people that I've met in Rotary have made me a better, not only business person, but also when it comes to families. I just feel so wonderful, the fact that, you know, that you'll be in Charles's lives, that all of you'll be in Charles's life. That's just so wonderful. And that when I hear that, you know, Drew's been able to do this 5 times, I think, good job, Drew. That gives me a little more strength. And the idea that it's that community membership, the family membership, whatever, you know, the logistics look like, or whatever the name looks like, I think that's a wonderful way to go forward.
So we have a question from a past district governor in my district, who I think is also one of Drew's, I think he was your classmate, Eric Schmautz from the Rotary Club of San Francisco. And he was asking, you know, he worked as a family advisor for the Rotary International Convention. And one of the key resistance points on this was that there's not the budget to do things differently. And so his question is, has that changed, the budget for staff, budget for volunteers, and has it been made a priority? And I can say, as somebody who's worked on convention, before you answer that, either one of you, I think it's a little, I get this question about why can't we make it more accessible to people with disabilities at convention? And it frankly pisses me off. It's bullshit. because I know what we pay speakers. I know what we pay for a lot of other aspects around convention. And I know what it would cost to make some of these other things happen. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on the budget for convention? You've both been involved with conventions as much as I have. So
Yeah, so I'll just take a real quick and easy stab at this as it relates to I will say we are better than we were. And if you look at even just the cost of bringing a person under the age of 18, it's better today than it was. So I think it's there is more mindfulness around it. I've even personally worked with staff to try to create, even if it's just marketing materials of what is family friendly in the city that you're going to, right? What events make sense for potentially a child to attend. So I think there are more eyes on it today than there have been. So I think for nothing other than having the conversation and starting the conversation, we're better off than where we were. Whether we like it or not, economics dictate and direct a lot of what we do. And that's on every event, that's every level. It doesn't make a difference. It comes down to what as an organization we have to spend, what we are looking for our members to spend. So economics will always be around it. But I do believe if there was a scenario in which all of a sudden we now have 5,000 kids showing up at convention, it's going to look a whole lot different than it does now when you might have a couple hundred, and maybe that's even generous, showing up at convention. So if we're looking for changes to be made, it has to be the audience. But if the audience is going to be predominantly, that middle-aged to that next generation Rotarians spending their hard-earned dollar going to convention, well, then they don't need to focus on the 100 of us that are bringing kids. It's just it's just the reality of the situation. So
yeah.
So my question is, though, when you're bringing kids, and I get that there's this added expense, but is that something that parents should be covering a little bit of the cost from that as well? Like if there's, I don't know, some sort of programming for kids that's built around that, is that something that both of you would be willing to pay for, or is that something that you feel it should be included as sort of this inclusive piece to do that?
I think, Brian, as you mentioned, at the beginning, which is when people say we can't afford it, right? And what people pay, what Rotary pays speakers, and it's just simply not true. And I feel that working, because our business is based in Japan and I work with Rotary, I feel like working with very traditional Japanese organizations in Rotary is sometimes the same thing. And I feel like they've prepared me really well for each other. And, I also hear the same thing when it comes to Japanese businesses and corporations. They say, we can't possibly do that. We don't have the money. The question is not if we have the money. The question is, do we have the money to keep doing what we're doing? Can we financially, economically stay on this path? And is it looking good? The answer is no. The answer is very clearly no. And so the question is not if we have the money. The question is, again, getting back to why some certain things in Rotary are not as successful, or they're not as efficient or effective or enjoyable or as fun as possible, is because we haven't taken the time to very intently, with intention, plan something. And it's the same thing when it comes to these, for example, these kinds of events that you're talking about, Brian. And I think we don't even have to ask. I don't think we have to make up the answer. I think we can look at past Rotarian behavior and look at that like as our user behavior and say, what does our research tells us? And the research tells us that Rotarians are willing to pay for things that are specifically interesting to them. That's why we have lots of additional events at convention, right? People, whether you wanted to go on a specific tour or a museum tour or a food tour, they have all these different things and people are willing to pay for them. So I think when it comes to customizing your experience, I think the user research tells us that Rotarians are willing to pay for a customized experience, right? So I think when it comes to that and having, certain, things for families, people would be willing to do that, to customize their experience. I think what we're looking at, however, is the baseline. What is a baseline event? And so, for example, the fact that when it comes to, wheelchair accessibility, which is the same thing for a pram, to be honest. So whether it's, a wheelchair or a pram, you're actually hitting on both groups, because, if you've got a flight of stairs versus an elevator, if you're carrying your pram up, it's not so easy. So I think it comes down to being very intentional, putting the user at the center and saying, how can we design for this person? And I think the budget thing, I think that's just an excuse for people that haven't just taken the time to sit down and rethink what the event could look like.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned about the pram, but I also think about, you know, one of my favorite photos of you as a mother, Brittany, is the photo of you nursing Charles, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
do we have, how difficult is it to create a space for women to nurse?
Yeah. So I had Charles in Mexico, and Mexicans, for anyone that hasn't been to Mexico, doesn't have an experience in Mexico, love kids. The more kids, the better. Kids are welcome everywhere. And so when I felt very comfortable in Mexico nursing my son, obviously with discretion, out in public, you know, we're in a public space when I was nursing him there. And so it's not even about, you know, always like creating like these kind of very closed like privacy booths or anything like that. It's simply just having an environment where there are families, and that's okay, and that there's a mutual respect. So for me, that was and that, again, if you're speaking about cost, you know, that didn't cost anything. It was simply just being in an environment in a country where people just love children.
And I hear that, but I think that being conscious that we're a global organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is, I mean, we have members that come to convention, for example, from the Middle East.
Exactly. Yes.
Where whether it might not fit into our, you know, what we consider acceptable.
Yes.
North, it's
That's right.
not something that really is acceptable for them, and so it is sort of
That's
a
right.
mutual thing, right? So it is something
Yeah.
that I think that we need to consider when we're looking at these things holistically.
Yes.
We have to create the space for you as a mother, and we have to create space for people of faith who
Yes.
that is something that is just something that would be so
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah. Well, I think if I remember correctly, we have prayer rooms usually at the convention. I remember like I've been to conventions. We usually have prayer rooms, which is very similar. So I think I was I was an advisor at a startup event recently, and in the invitation email, there's the organizer wrote to me, and Brittany, if you're still nursing Charles, we can organize a feeding room. And I have never said yes more quickly to an event, because I thought, even though I'm not nursing Charles anymore, but I thought the fact that you've gone out of your way to think about that was just so special. And I showed up, you know, for the entire event. And I think, what are these moments? It doesn't have to necessarily be a nursing mother, but there are many opportunities that you can have, that you can engage and you can surprise and create joy and connection for your members, that you'll create a member for life.
And it's interesting because Tanya Hall mentioned, how cool would it be if we created a space for kids at the convention? We could probably find sponsors. The convention's always in large cities. There's always, you know,
Yes.
probably find sponsors for that specific thing to promote it. And it would be something that could really, you know, when the kids start bouncing off the walls, because kids are kids, right? Like, I mean, the best, most well-behaved kids, which are obviously your 7 combined kids, or 6, I guess. Well, maybe, I don't know, Brittany, do you have anything you want to share with us? Maybe there is 7 on the way. But to create a space where they can go in and just let some steam off, like, you know, kind of bounce off the walls and do whatever they want to and do the things that kids want to do. But if there was a way to incorporate that into convention and into district conferences and into these things that really would do it. So Drew, you know, both of you, but I'm going to start with Drew. What sort of, as we kind of wrap this conversation up, what do you see as sort of like a call to action for people to really move forward as we continue this conversation? Because this is just the first, you know, of hopefully a long but not too long conversation on this, on how we can really engage families more.
So I think we've spoken about it numerous times throughout this hour, and that's the conversation, right? So every time we have an event, we first, for nothing other, even if it's a checklist, just check the box. Are we being mindful of all our members, of all the demographics that we're looking to attract? So if you start there, I think that's a win that we don't currently have, because there are some that do it very well, but the majority, as just a broad stroke, we don't. Next is, can we find ways that we make sure, even if every one of our meetings or events aren't family friendly, that we're purposeful and find events that provide our members an opportunity to try this, to have members who might say this isn't the space for it, see that it could be the space for it. You could ultimately wind up with, there are clubs specifically in North America that have 2 meetings when they come together every week. They have a meeting for the Rotarians, and they have a meeting in the next room over for the kids of Rotarians. And they usually have an interactor or Rotary, whoever run those activities. But to me, that's it. That's what I'd love to get to, because now we're not having, and it's going back to the beginning, our members choose. And if we can do that, then we win. We all win in that environment. So I think really that the action item is, we all have a voice in this. We have a voice in everything we do in Rotary. And that's to make sure that we're keeping not just families top of mind, but anybody from an accessibility perspective, providing them the opportunity to be part of us and not have to choose.
And Brittany, for you, what is your call to action for all of us, for all of Rotary, for all the world?
So I would do the 3 things that honestly that we do in my business, and this is what we do, because people say, what about the economics of it, of Rotary, we can't afford it. I'm going to tell you what we do in our business, how we make people money. There's 3 things. First thing we do, we speak to users, right? I want you, exactly what you mentioned, have it top of mind, speak to people. And as Brian mentioned, with their work with the DEI task force, or the advisory committee, speak to people not only in your club, but maybe a little bit to the left and to the right of your club. Why didn't they join? What about your friends? What about someone kind of in your community? That's the first thing, speak to people. Second thing is that I want you to prototype, right? Prototype means you're going to try it out. It doesn't mean this is how it's going to be forever, right? And the third thing that I want you to do is test. So we're going to speak to people, we're going to build a prototype, and we're going to test it. Now, testing is really important. Testing is when the whole club comes together, or the whole event comes together, and you say, how did this go? And you don't fight the feedback. You don't say, you don't try to bias people. You say, how was this event for you, right? And you are open to that feedback, what people say. They're going to share some positive things. They're going to share some great ideas. And maybe they're going to share some things that didn't go so well that maybe we need to brush up on. So I want you, those 3 things in mind. I want you to speak to people. The next time that you include a family or event, or even just something, whatever family looks like for your club, I want you to prototype it with the mindset that this doesn't have to be like this forever. It's not like, oh, we have, kids at one meeting. What's the rest of is this how it is forever? No, just try it once. And then when you've tried it, very actively, openly engage and ask and beg for people's feedback. When they give it to you, don't say anything. Just say thank you. Feedback is a gift. Just say thank you. And then as the club, go through the feedback and have a look and see what the sentiment was. Because maybe someone says something negative and you go, oh, you know what? We did miss that. Actually, that is something that we want to look at. So make sure that when you do test this model of a new meeting or a conference or whatever, make sure that we circle back with feedback, right? Make sure we circle back with feedback so that the whole club feels like that this is owners, that they own it as well. It's not just those with children, it's everybody's experience. So those would be my 3 things. Speak to people, try it once, get feedback.
I love all that. You two, I cannot thank you both enough for joining us today. It's like, we've Drew, you and I have talked about this topic since really we were hanging out in Calgary, and Brittany, what facilitated this, but we've been talking about this topic for several months, and I'm really happy to bring you both together to have this conversation. I'm here to support it, both through the DEI Council and also just through me personally. I'm 100% on board with this, and I love it. So thank you both for being part of this and for sharing all this today. It's been really cool to have you here.
And thank you for so much for holding space. This wouldn't be possible without you. And Brian, your voice is so important in Rotary. And anytime I see you speak up, it's something I want to hear. So thank you so much for holding space for this as well. It's really important. Thank you.
It's not always something that somebody wants to hear, but I'm glad you do.
what she said, and I can't agree more. I mean, Brian, your voice in this organization is so, at least for me, well received, and I see how just people totally open up and can relate and see themselves in you and your stories, and it's incredible. So I'm really grateful that you've put this together and that you're thinking about this. and you're championing this. It's really awesome. And Brittany, it was very much a pleasure to, if you will, share the stage with you to
Likewise, thank you,
this
Drew.
great day of all days, your birthday, and
I
again,
know.
happy birthday.
And yeah, seriously, happy birthday. I know it's super
Thank you.
before everybody goes, I want to share a couple things that we have coming up, which I'm super excited about. For those of you that don't know, on January 1st, New Year's Day, since the club was started, we have hosted a global cleanup. And this is going to be the 4th annual global cleanup that our club has put on. We encourage people, no matter where you are in the world, to get out there, pick up some trash. We use the Clean Swell app, which you can download from the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, and use the code RCGA space NYD24, and it'll track it. So last year we collected over 2 tons of trash globally. We have cleanups scheduled in Kenya. We have 2 scheduled in Spain. We have 1 in the UK. I know there's a big one happening in New York. Here in San Francisco at the beach, there's Rotary Club of Chinatown is going to be joining. And it's an amazing, amazing event. So we encourage you guys to get out there, reach out to me if you would like to know more about how to do that. The other super exciting thing, and I'm putting the link in chat right now, our next speaker series event is going to be on February 10th at 9 a.m. Pacific. We're going to be welcoming Rotary International President nominee Mario Cesar Camargo, and that was Cameras is not right. Sorry about the typo. And he is going to be joining us. As many of you know, the speaker series welcomes the president nominee every year. And so we're thrilled to be welcoming Mario this year. And we're going to be just talking about what his plans are for his Rotary year, how he really envisions this. I have had the opportunity to work with Mario. He was the president's rep at a district conference that I keynoted at this spring in Portugal. And he's an awesome guy. I'm really excited about having him as our future president and the leader of our organization. So please click on the link, register today. You will get reminders about that, and would love to see you all there. And with that, that's all. I'm going to open it up if people want to just stay and chat. If wish Brittany a happy birthday, feel free. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today.